It is a whopping tax raid, and from the party that says it likes to cut tax too. But it's a big, bold and controversial attempt to solve the massive crisis in social care.
Yes, I accept that this breaks a manifesto commitment, which is not something I do lightly, but a global pandemic was in no one's manifesto, Mr. Speaker.
It'll cost us all $12 billion and is mostly going to the NHS in the first instance, but it will allow pensioners to protect their assets, even as younger people who don't have any are taxed more. So, right move or wrong move? Also on News at 10 tonight. The Prime Minister breaks another manifesto pledge too, as the triple lock on pensions becomes just a double lock. Some brave women take to the streets of Kabul to protest as the Taliban announces its government, the Interior Minister, a specially designated global terrorist, according to the FBI. Pictures that never failed to shock. Neil spends a day watching the migrant boats just keep on coming as they risk this treacherous crossing in these tiny dinghies. Virginia Wade on the brilliant British prodigy, following in her footsteps.
I think Emma is the new stock British tennis. There's no question. She's just got special qualities. She's good in all departments.
And the Navy Wrens, who helped sink the Bismarck.
I was terribly worried I'd volunteered to be a spy, and I thought spies have to jump out of aeroplanes. The last thing in the world I was brave enough to do.
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. When he stood on the steps of Downing Street a little over 2 years ago and pledged to fix the crisis in social care, Boris Johnson perhaps didn't imagine it quite like this. The health service ravaged by a pandemic and a core manifesto promise broken. But these are strange times, and today we witnessed a Tory Prime Minister announcing a pretty big tax rise. The hike in national insurance will raid our pockets, including those of working pensioners, to the tune of £12 billion a year. It'll mean even rich pensioners will not have to spend more than £86,000 on their care in old age. The real issue, perhaps, the majority of the money will go in the first instance to help the NHS, not social care. In theory, that balance will shift over time, but many in the care sector tonight are worried that when all is said and done, this will do precious little to fix the crisis.
Boris Johnson has said he's a low-tax Tory, once arguing national insurance rises were unfair.
I'm on message. Look, we love NHS on social care.
But the message today is very different. A £12 billion tax hike for the NHS and then social care, a new design for the Tories that breaks a manifesto promise.
Governments have ducked this problem for decades. You can't fix the NHS without fixing social care. Yes, I accept that this breaks a manifesto commitment, which is not something I do lightly, but a global pandemic was in no one's manifesto, Mr. Speaker.
And so national insurance will go up by 1.25 percentage points, with employers paying the same, making it 2.5 overall. That means a worker on an average 30 grand salary will pay an extra £255 per year.
Keir Starmer.
Yeah! The Labour leader taunted the Prime Minister with his manifesto promise not to raise tax.
A promise that they all made at the last election, every single one of them. A tax rise on young people, supermarket workers and nurses.
So what will this tax mean for social care? Those with assets under £20,000 will not pay for care. If you have assets between £20,000 and £100,000, you'll pay for some of the costs, but it will be means tested. Those with assets above £100,000 will pay the full costs up to a maximum of £86,000. But none of this will apply until October 2023. Those currently in the care system will not benefit from this cap. That is not fair, is it?
unfortunately, there will be people sometimes that are the other side of a start date. And I completely understand the concerns that have been raised by people affected or I guess not affected in that way. It's important that we just get on with this change.
These ministers say it's COVID that's forced them to turn their backs on a promise. But some say that's an excuse.
We've always known that we needed to spend a lot more on social care to sort out the means test and provide more money. That's wholly unrelated to the pandemic. So certainly all of the money that was found today for social care actually has nothing to do with the pandemic.
Overall, it's good news for the man who first came up with a social care plan 10 years ago.
In an ideal world, I'd love the cap to be a bit lower, but the really important thing was to get this in place, because at the moment, the cap is infinity. You're exposed to absolutely everything. This is a time to be delighted that action's happening, but also to look back with sadness on the problems that have happened over the last many years.
But there are nerves about the future too, that money ploughed into the NHS backlog first will not leave enough for social care. Anushka Astana, News at 10.
Well, forgetting the politics of all this for a moment, there are people up and down the country who, of course, care deeply about the impact today's announcement will have. The sector's many hard-working staff, the people they look after, and not forgetting the families wanting their best for the loved ones. Now, they've been telling us what difference they think the changes will make.
Hi, Lily. It's Katie. Hello.
This is the kind of work that deserves all of our care.
You okay?
Kate is on the front line of a sector on the back foot. Today, she's seeing 98-year-old Lily, who's just lost her twin sister.
Are you missing her?
Missing her? I'm missing her like hell. Yeah. Well, we're always together.
Now Kate is both company and comfort.
What's got you there?
It breaks your heart, really, it does. When people are just lonely, that's what they are. You want to fix it and you can't fix it, it's not in your hands to fix it. You just got to be here and do your day-to-day things, follow the care plan, and it's not enough, really.
You really care about your job after today's announcement. Do you feel as if the government cares about you?
No. What was Boris clapping on Downing Street for? What was that all about? Because today, that hasn't helped at all, has it?
I know we're putting extra on you, and I really do appreciate it. Thank you.
Back at the office, right now they are constantly applauding staff for doing extra hours. Managers Angela and Sarah are pleased there'll be more money for care, but they too doubt it'll be enough to attract new applicants to fill record vacancies.
In probably the last 3-4 months, we've had two.
Two applicants?
Two, and one of those is just about to start working.
And how many vacancies have you got?
At the moment, we have 11.
You know, I feel that, you know, once again, we're, you know, almost a second cousin to, you know, to the NHS.
For others, today's announcement was well worth a watch. Carol's family is about to sell her father-in-law's home to pay for his care. Yesterday we filmed her preparing it for market. Now she may get to keep more of the proceeds.
The thought of having some over that we can give to our children, which is what we've worked all our lives for, our children, I think that's brilliant.
But today's reforms aren't just about who pays the price for this care.
Oh, Lily, I'll see you at the end of the week, probably.
But whether it's valued enough. Paul Brandt, News at 10, Wiltshire.
OK, bye then.
So we now know what the plan for social care is, but exactly how will the extra money be spent? The government says increasing national insurance will raise £36 billion over the next 3 years. Most of that is going towards clearing the backlog in the NHS, as you've heard, with only £5.4 billion earmarked for social care. Of that, £2.5 billion will fund the care cap. It's the business where no one will pay more than £86,000 for their care, and £2.9 billion will help pay for social care reform. But will it be enough? Some experts say that in England alone, nearly £6 billion is needed to meet basic demand in social care. And what about the rest of the UK? Well, the government says Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland will together receive an extra £2.2 billion. That's 15% more than they would pay in. Now, look, this is a big day in all kinds of ways. Anushka and Paul, as you can see, join me this evening. Paul, you know, we've watched your coverage of the care sector over the last 18 months. So much of it has been heartbreaking. What's their response and yours to today?
Well, Thomas, it's a huge day for the care sector. This was the announcement they've been building up to for not days or weeks or years, but decades. And this was their moment, they'd hoped. And really tonight they feel it is a moment missed in many ways. So look, Boris Johnson is getting some credit, quite a lot of credit from many in the care sector for at least tackling this issue of who pays for care, the care cap. Many of his predecessors, several of them at least, ducked that issue. But that really is just about moving money around. There's not a lot of extra money going into the care sector tonight. As you've just said, most of it's going into the NHS. So an announcement that was supposed to be about social care really has left many of them feeling again like a secondary service.
Anisha, can I throw that to you? I mean, Tories raising taxes, you don't see that every day, do you?
Well, you know, Tom, that there would have usually been resignations from the front bench over something like this. But this morning in the Cabinet, there were only a couple of concerns raised. More people spoke for this policy, although maybe worried about a reshuffle, and very little dissent on the backbenchers. It's not that they're not worried. One senior backbencher said to me, I will vote for this policy tomorrow, but I'm going to hold my nose when I do it. Lots of their constituents, however, are worried about the NHS backlog, but same issue that Paul is raising all the time, that essentially, is the money going to really go from the NHS? Are you going to take billions back and really send it over to the care sector?
Yeah, and we have got this white paper coming up in the autumn where, in theory, broader reform of the care sector will be on the table. So there's hope that maybe there might be more coming down the line. But I think what the sector fears is whether the stars will quite align in the same way that they have done this time around. You know, will the sector have the same profile it had during the pandemic? Will they come across a Prime Minister later down the line who's willing to raise taxes again in this really substantial way? And can they afford to wait that long? Because they've got an unprecedented staffing crisis, they've got carers facing complete burnout, and they've got millions of people not getting the care that they need.
And in terms of the Prime Minister, will he do this again? This is a huge gamble for him. You know, tomorrow's Telegraph, huge front page, highest taxes since the war. They say it's the death knell of conservatism. Now, earlier on today, I thought Boris Johnson looked quite relaxed about this. He obviously hadn't seen that front page at the time. But his gamble on this is, number one, he can persuade his backbenchers to back him this once, although there will be a moderate rebellion, so maybe not again. But secondly, that the public will come with him because they're fairly persuaded on national insurance that it is a good thing to do. They'll forgive him for breaking a manifesto promise, but perhaps not again.
OK, a massive issue we'll be back to, no doubt. But for now, thank you very much indeed. Another pledge in Boris Johnson's election-winning manifesto was to keep the triple lock on state pensions. You probably remember it, but promises, hey. In another quite remarkable volte-face, it's gone from the triple to the double lock. With wages soaring because of the pandemic, pensioners were in line for an increase of 8%. Instead, the annual rise will now be based on either 2.5% or inflation. It is, ministers say, just a one-off measure in exceptional circumstances.
As we come to the end of the pandemic and cruise back to normality, we now have to deal with the financial consequences. Those on a state pension today were told that the triple lock was going, meaning that their payments wouldn't be increasing by as much as they thought. At this bowls club in North London, there were mixed opinions about the news.
I don't think it's unfair, but I do think it's a little unreasonable, bearing in mind we're just coming out of a pandemic.
It's time that they got this sorted, so it is a good thing there is a plan.
Well, for those people who rely on a state pension, who rely on a minimal income, it's devastating news.
The triple pensions lock meant that pensions would rise each year by whatever was highest out of inflation, the rise in average earnings, or 2.5%. But as people moved off furlough back to work, their pay went up by more than usual. So average earnings are now expected to rise by 8%, something the government calls a statistical anomaly. So for next year, the government's going to ignore it, and the triple lock will now become a double lock. But for how long?
Setting aside the earnings element is temporary and only for 1 year. This means we can and will apply the triple lock as usual from next year for the remainder of this Parliament, in line with our manifesto commitment.
It was in 2019 that the Conservatives made the triple lock pledge during the election campaign, and charities are concerned that this U-turn might end up being the start of a change in position.
We're going to be watching very carefully to make sure that ministers don't use this as an excuse to ditch the triple lock altogether. The triple lock is really very important for older people. It does help to prevent their incomes from falling behind those of everybody else.
It's not often that a Conservative government increases taxes and reduces pensions on the same day, and it's something they say they don't want to repeat. Shihab Khan, ITV News, Westminster.
In Scotland today, Nicola Sturgeon has given the green light for her government to push ahead with planning for a second independence referendum. Work on holding another vote was halted during the pandemic, but the First Minister confirmed today that effort would begin again, with the aim being to hold a referendum before the end of 2023. OK, if there were any lingering doubts about how the Taliban intends to rule Afghanistan, they may well have vanished with the announcement of its interim government today. Among those appointed are many of the old guard, and one name of particular interest to the FBI. The new Interior Minister is what they call a specially designated global terrorist with a $5 million bounty on his head. You may not be totally shocked to learn that there were no women in the cabinet. There were, though, some who took to the streets of Kabul today in protest, a demonstration that was met with a harsh response.
It is those with most to lose whose voices ring out the loudest. The protests, led by women, seem to grow in strength.
One day I won't be here.
Long live the resistance, long live freedom, they cried. But the rights to work and education the Taliban claims it's granted women do not extend to the right to dissent. Some were beaten.
I'll walk when you go.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? That's a great
Before heavily
plan.
armed fighters moved in to scatter the crowds. Volley after volley was fired into the sky. The Taliban said they'd broken up an illegal march.
They tried to gun us, to kill us.
We spoke to one of the protesters whose identity we're protecting.
We are scared, but it is our responsibility to fight to define our rights for our countries, for our families. We don't let them to get our rights.
There are no women in the caretaker government announced today, nor any sign of inclusivity. Instead, it is the old boys network of hardliners, led by Taliban veteran Mullah Mohammed Hassan Akhund, who's on a UN blacklist. Taliban co-founder Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar will be the deputy. And making it tough for the US to deal with them, Sirajuddin Haqqani is the Interior Minister. He's an FBI-designated global terrorist whose feared network maintained close ties to Al-Qaeda. That hardly reaches out to Western donors ahead of an international conference to raise £150 million in emergency aid. At the side of a Kabul road, we filmed desperate souls trying to sell their own possessions, relics of better days, though there are few with money to buy. Dissent and economic collapse, one will fuel the other. Afghanistan's new government may be forced to find a compromise, though that is not in the Taliban's nature. John Ray, News at 10.
Back here, the waters of the English Channel were calm this morning, but that belies, of course, the dangers faced by the hundreds of migrants who have attempted the crossing in recent days. Yesterday alone, around 750 made the trip. Well, today we filmed as many more tried to join them in boats barely big enough to hold them. At least 18 were spotted in the time we spent on the water. They know the risks involved, but believe they are worth taking for what one called their dream.
Amid the tranquility of a September sunrise, we're heading out into the Channel. But it doesn't take long before you're confronted by the turmoil playing out on these calm waters. With just paddles and no life jackets, we come across migrants heading to the UK mid-channel on a flimsy inflatable in the world's busiest waterway. They tell me it's a risk worth taking.
This is better, you know.
You think it's better?
Yeah, this is better.
Okay.
If you have some dream, you can do anything.
But this is a nightmare. Another dinghy comes into view. This group say they fled from Sudan. How long you've been at sea? 2 hours? 3 hours?
No, 6 hours.
6 hours?
Yes.
And you will keep going?
Yes.
Reporting a boat on our starboard side. Approximately 40 persons on board.
Some have life jackets and some don't, is that correct?
That's correct.
Over the radio, at least 18 migrant boats were reported while we were out.
We want help right now, sir.
I know, we have called UK Coast Guard. Yeah. These people are desperate and willing to risk it all. The criminal gangs who prey on them know that demand to cross the channel remains as high as ever. And those gangs have no regard for the lethal consequences of their trade. On shore, Hazratullah, who's asked not to be identified, fled Afghanistan when he was 14. He tells me he doesn't regret the risks he took.
No one wants to leave the country for no reason. No one is going to take the big risk for themselves. I was 14 when I left. Why I left? I take the big risk.
The more obstacles we put in their way, the more dangerous the routes that they will find. We have to find a way that they have better options, safer options, humanitarian visas, for example, so that they can make the journey across the channel in safety.
The Home Office says it's targeting the gangs responsible. The Home Secretary is reported to be angry the French aren't doing enough, and is said to be ready to withhold millions of pounds promised to them to block migrant crossings. Dover's MP says urgent action is needed.
We do need to see the French doing more to stop the boats leaving. We must now look at turnbacks in the English Channel and making returns to bring an end to this small boats crisis.
As the latest arrivals wait to be processed, how many more will follow? Neil Connery, News at 10, Dover.
We're now just a couple of months away from what could be a defining moment for our climate, the COP26 summit in Glasgow. There, the talk will be of clean energy and reaching net zero emissions. Yet just 130 miles away in Cumbria, plans are being discussed for an energy source often blamed for those same emissions, coal. A public inquiry began today into proposals for a new mine near Whitehaven. Its backers say it will create hundreds of jobs. At what cost to the environment? Opponents reply.
In a town where coal was once king, a monument to past industry and prosperity. But the prospect of a new mine is now on the horizon, bringing with it 500 jobs and nearly 500,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide every year. After years of campaigning against the proposal, climate activists speak or sing with one voice.
It's a coal mine we don't want and we don't need, and the public inquiry will hear all the arguments.
It's in blast furnaces making steel where the coal would be used to reduce our reliance on imports from countries like America and Australia. But scientists say the industry needs to find other ways to fuel the red-hot fires. Is it really feasible for the steel industry to stop using coking coal?
There are already existing technologies that you can use to make steel without coal. And the challenge is to scale up those technologies, and you're not going to scale up and encourage those technologies by digging more cheap coal out of the ground.
The final decision about what happens here lies with the government. A tussle between the potential for jobs versus the protection of the planet, the country's international standing versus the promises to people back home. And many locals feel they're owed an opportunity and had been expecting the mine to go ahead.
We were looking forward to a brighter future with a lot of things coming into the town. So for that to be taken away is a real disappointment, and it does make you really quite nervous for the future of Whitehaven and for us as a business.
The inquiry will hear 4 weeks of evidence before it comes to its recommendation, answering whether coal has a role in our future or should remain firmly buried in the past. Hannah Miller, News at 10, Whitehaven.
Now, it has been more than 50 years since a British woman won the US Tennis Open. That was, of course, Virginia Wade in 1968. Since then, only 3 others from these shores have made it to the quarterfinals: Joyce Williams, Joe Jury and Johanna Konta. That was until last night, when Emma Raducanu produced her latest stellar performance to join this elite club. And the woman whose success she hopes to emulate told us the 18-year-old has the star quality to be at the top of the game for a long time.
Nobody knows what she is capable of or where her limits lie. But Emma Raducanu is proving to be a formidable opponent on the court, easing her way into the US Open quarterfinals. Cheering her on in the stadium, Virginia Wade, the last British woman to win the US Open back in 1968, now watching the newcomer take the mantle and hailing the teenager as the player who could end her long reign as Britain's last female winner.
I think Emma is the new star of British tennis. There's no question. She's just got special qualities. She's good in all departments. I mean, obviously, let's face it, you know, she's still young, so you don't know how it's going to evolve, but without anything going wrong, she should be set up there with the top girls for a long time.
And it's no wonder Raducanu is instilling such excitement. She's played 7 matches here and is yet to drop a set.
How good is that?
She's rising to the occasion at her first Grand Slam overseas, playing in the world's largest stadium. Her former coach, Matt James, says her talent was obvious from the age of 15. What sets her apart?
I think fearless is probably the best word to describe her. Relentless determination, and it's almost like tunnel vision, that when she's out there she's not showing any sort of weakness.
Her greatest challenge comes tomorrow. Her opponent, an Olympic gold medalist. Sejal Corrie, News at 10.
And finally, when you receive a letter in the post, remember them, you might be able to work out who sent it from the handwriting, of course. Well, imagine if the handwriting in question was Morse code. Spotting the telltale signs of individual telegraphists during the Second World War was a key skill of a group of women known as the Wrens. Doing so meant they knew which ship was sending the messages they intercepted, information that was sent on to Bletchley Park's codebreakers, secret work which helped sink the Bismarck and which the Wrens have broken their silence on for the first time.
Their sacrifices are remembered, but until recently many of their stories have remained as secret as the codes they helped to crack. At the National Memorial Arboretum today, a rededication ceremony for the Y services, short for Wireless Intercept, among them the World War II women who eavesdropped on the enemy.
I was terribly worried I'd volunteered to be a spy, and I thought spies have to jump out of aeroplanes. The last thing in the world I was brave enough to do.
At 18, Pat Davis joined the Women's Royal Naval Service, the Wrens. Her job was to scan the radio frequencies listening for messages sent by German ships.
If you got a signal, then it was all go, because you had to get it down absolutely accurately. If they were booming away and loud and not very far off our coast, it was obviously pretty well an emergency.
But only now are we learning of the landmark moments their secret work made possible. Like when the Allies sank the German ship Bismarck, it was the Wrens' skills that had helped them to find it.
They were so good that they could recognise an individual German operator. So they knew when Fritz or Adolf was on watch, and if they knew which ship Adolf was serving in, then they knew where his ship was too. That's how skilled they were.
Now finally, the first comprehensive history of their achievements is being published 50 years after their code-breaking colleagues at Bletchley Park first revealed their secrets. Now aged 98, Pat told me why it's taken so long for the Wrens to tell their tale.
Having signed the Official Secrets Act, which says that there are a lot of penalties and the ultimate one is death, you are rather careful. Wouldn't mind the Wrens getting a bit more credit, because what we were doing was quite an important wartime job.
But it was a dangerous one too. Many were killed by German bombs. But after decades hiding it, the significance of their work is being noticed. Ben Chapman, News at 10, Staffordshire.
Great story. See you same time tomorrow. Good night. Thank you for watching.